It's a contradiction. They're not saying the same thing. One of them is telling the truth, one of them is not.
Discrepancies, conflicting accounts. This is now part of the Nolan Wells investigation. You're going to hear people ask whether someone is lying, which is very fair given the reporting. It's time to review the questions and the contradictions related to the case of Nolan Wells' death. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber.
Everybody's off. That's what a friend told a 911 dispatcher as a boat took on water off Horn Island, Mississippi, on the 4th of July. Everybody's off. Except one 18-year-old wasn't. He was still on that island, or somewhere between that island and the mainland, and 2 days later he washed up on the same stretch of sand where he was last seen alive. Picture a single photograph. Grainy, time-stamped, shared and reshared until nobody agrees anymore on what it actually shows or when it was actually taken. That photograph is this entire case in miniature. A piece of evidence that either places a missing teenager at a party he supposedly never made it to or doesn't. One image. Two completely irreconcilable stories. That's Nolan Wells. Before we go deeper into what the records actually show, make sure you're subscribed to the Hidden Case Files, because we don't just cover the story, we follow the evidence. Nolan Wells was a football player at Southwest Mississippi Community College, a graduate of Ocean Springs High School, an 18-year-old with his whole life boxed up and waiting to be unpacked.
Nolan Wells, the 18-year-old Southwest Mississippi Community College football player, graduate of Ocean Springs High, who disappeared while boating with friends on Horn Island, right off the coast of Mississippi during the July 4th weekend. Access to that island is limited to boats. It's a wilderness area. There's no commercial development. That's a very specific area. Now, he reportedly didn't return with his group of friends on their boat that day. His family reported him missing the night of July 4th after receiving a phone call at around 11 p.m. from one of his friends. So again, the report came in, late July 4th, early July 5th. His body was found on the island that Monday, July 6th, washed ashore. His family is demanding transparency. They are demanding a full investigation, a thorough investigation into what happened. And as you know, if you've been following our coverage here, you know that they have retained civil rights attorney Ben Crump. So let's get into the discrepancies. Let's get into the contradictions. One of the biggest...
On July 4th, he went boating with a group of friends to Horn Island, a barrier island off the Mississippi coast reachable only by water. No roads, no cell towers to speak of, just sand, scrub pine, and whoever you came with. He didn't come back with them. His family reported him missing that night, after a call from one of the friends came in around 11 p.m. 2 days later, on July 6th, his body was recovered on the island, found not by the search boats combing the water, but by a park ranger doing a routine morning pass. The official record says he drowned. The official record, at least the preliminary read of it, says there's no evidence of foul play. Here's the visual anchor. Hold on to it. A boy who was taught, in his father's own words, that you go with 5, you come back with 5, found washed up on the exact tip of the exact island where he was last seen, as if the tide simply returned him to the scene, unwilling to let the story end anywhere else. The family's account and the official account do not match. That's not an accusation. That's a documented fact, laid out across public statements, press conferences, and now filings. Let's start with the last confirmed sighting of Nolan Wells, because even that isn't settled. The narrative offered by his friends and echoed by at least one parent is that Nolan chose to stay behind on Horn Island to talk to a girl he'd met that day, with a plan to catch a ride back on someone else's boat later. That account has been repeated to multiple outlets by a friend identified as Trocken Shepherd, who says he and Nolan met the girl together, that Nolan liked her, and that this was the only time they ever spent together. But the family's attorney, civil rights lawyer Ben Crump, has presented a different version. One source from the girl herself, who allegedly told the family that Nolan said he was heading back to the boat, not staying on the island. 2 accounts. One boy. Only one of them can be true.
Contradictions right now is, what was Nolan doing? What were Nolan's movements that day? So Ben Crump held a press conference that the boys on the boat had claimed that Nolan went to Horn Island and decided to talk to a girl. Even one of the boys' mothers, Ashley Cole, according to WLOX, confirmed that her son said that. Her son was apparently with all them that day. and also confirmed that the boys had taken off because of boat trouble, which we're going to talk about, and that seems to be true. I'm going to explain that in a minute. But the Jackson County Sheriff's Office said that it believes Nolan stayed on the island. ABC News is reporting that one of Nolan's purported friends, Trayston Shepard, claims Nolan wanted to stay back to talk to a girl and that he would come back on another friend's boat. Shepard saying they met that day, and it's kind of one of those things. He did come off that day, that he really did like her, but that was the only time they ever hung out. Now, what is in dispute is whether Nolan actually did that. So that's one perspective, right? That's one narrative. But according to Ben Crump, this girl allegedly said that Nolan told her he was going back to the boat, as Crump said in the presser.
They're not saying the same thing. One of them is telling the truth. One of them is not. We have to get to the...
That's the first crack. Here's the second. At roughly 4 p.m. that afternoon, the boat Nolan's group had arrived on developed engine trouble near the western tip of the island. A bilge pump failure. According to public dispatch information, the vessel had to be towed. Records obtained through a Mississippi Department of Marine Resources request reportedly show the boat departing the dock at 9:56 that morning, arriving at Horn Island a little after 11, and then leaving the island at 4:31 in the afternoon, eventually returning to the dock, then later making a separate trip to a boat launch that evening, consistent with being hauled out of the water entirely. Nowhere in that GPS trail is there a clean, undisputed answer to the only question that matters. Was Nolan Wells on that boat when it left the island, or wasn't he?
News also obtained GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources that tracked the boat's movements. This is big too, because this is information they say they obtained via records request. And according to the reporting, the vessel apparently left the dock at approximately 9:56 that morning, arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. According to GPS data, the boat left Horn Island at 4:31 that afternoon, returned to its original departure dock. It then traveled into Fort Bayou at around 5:52 before returning to the dock at 6:06. Later that evening, the boat went to the Fort Bayou boat launch at 7:19, traveled overland, which would suggest it was towed by a vehicle to the owner's residence. So to put that into perspective and why it matters, Ben Crump claims Nolan was last seen on the island at 3 p.m. Again, according to Ashley Cole, the mother, her son, right? She's a local judge, by the way. She says her son claims he last saw Nolan at around 3 p.m. on the island, and her son left at 4:30 p.m. Now, we haven't seen necessarily a discrepancy in terms of when Nolan was last seen, but this is something to keep in mind, right? This is one of those outstanding.
This is where we ask the question the case still hasn't answered. If 7 people got into trouble on the water that afternoon, and everyone radioed in safe, where in that timeline does an 18-year-old simply vanish without anyone noticing he was gone? The family says this isn't like Nolan. Not a small detail, a foundational one. His father has said publicly that he drilled the buddy system into his son for years. You go with the group, you come back with the group. If that's true, then Nolan choosing to strand himself alone on a remote island, with no way home except the goodwill of near strangers, isn't just unusual. It's a documented behavioral contradiction that the family says never gets explained by the "he stayed for a girl" narrative. Only assumed. The record doesn't add up. That's the moral refrain of this case, and we're going to come back to it because it applies to more than just his location. The record doesn't add up when we get to the photograph. A widely circulated image, allegedly showing Nolan at a party in the early hours of July 5th, hours after he was reportedly last seen on the island, was shared publicly, including by Crump's team, as a potential piece of the timeline.
I know he wouldn't do that. I preach that to him every day. You're lying to me. Now, there's also been quite a big back and forth about whether he ever made it back to the boat, back to the mainland, because it centers around this photo of a party, a photo that seemingly, arguably, shows Nolan at this pool party early in the morning of July 5th. So in other words, if you believe that, the idea would be he left the boat, made it to the mainland, went to this party, died somehow, brought back to Horn Island afterwards, and then found dead and washed ashore. I mean, that would be presumably what happened, right? The problem is, look, Ben Crump even apparently shared this photo, again, of what people believe to be Nolan at this party. And according to the New York Post, Crump posted this photo to social media. And this was a post that was circulated by Crump. This was from an account called Chanel Tarot TV. The streets are talking. Now listen, I don't know if these are facts or rumors because no official statements have been confirmed. We sometimes have to follow all clues until the truth is found. Here's what was discovered on social media last night. Social media allegations claim a photo exists.
If authentic and correctly dated, it would mean Nolan somehow made it off Horn Island onto the mainland and to a party before whatever happened to him occurred. But Shepard has publicly disputed the date entirely, stating the photo is actually from a separate gathering nearly a week earlier, in a different town. At least one outlet has reported obtaining metadata that supports the earlier date. When directly asked about circulating an unverified photo, Crump's response was that reposting content to solicit tips is not the same as authenticating it. That's a meaningful legal distinction, and also, notably, doesn't resolve the underlying question of where that photo actually belongs on the timeline. Then there's the phone. Family representatives have publicly questioned why a phone belonging to an 18-year-old would be left behind on a boat at all, and have raised concerns about missing text and Snapchat data.
There is also no clear consensus on Nolan's phone either. Ben Crump said at a press conference last week, quote, "What teenager would leave their phone behind if they're going to stay on this island? What teenager wouldn't take their phone? It's not adding up at all." And he reportedly also highlighted that the family seemingly believes data, messages on that phone, on Nolan's phone, may have been deleted. And we believe that the family actually recovered his phone from Nolan's friends using the Life 360 app. But Nolan's friend, again, Mr. Shepard, told ABC it's not unusual for people to leave their phones in boats. Shepard's uncle, who was apparently driving one of the boats that day, confirmed that. Shepard said, quote, "All our friends are out there. Who are we communicating with? And we're in saltwater. We're not in freshwater. When Nolan got in the water, he put his phone on the boat dash along with probably 15 other phones." And this is another update, by the way, as we try to get to the truth about the phone. We have learned from Ben Crump that Nolan's phone will undergo a mutual inspection by both state investigators and the family's own experts. So that could be a game changer. That could be very—
Shepard and his family have offered an alternative, mundane explanation that leaving phones on the boat dash during swimming is common practice among the group to protect the devices from saltwater, ordinary teenage carelessness, or a missing piece of digital evidence. The record doesn't add up, and this time, both interpretations remain publicly unresolved. What we do know, because it's been stated on record, is that Nolan's phone will reportedly undergo a joint forensic inspection, state investigators and a family-retained digital forensics team examining the data together at the same time. That is not standard procedure in most investigations. It typically signals one thing: a documented breakdown of trust between a grieving family and the agency investigating their son's death.
very interesting. It's different to see that, right? A mutual inspection. I spoke to attorney Tyler Bailey about this. Take a look.
It's highly unusual that a victim's family, along with their attorney, would be allowed to participate with law enforcement in the inspection of a cell phone data that is really the crux, one of the crucial pieces of evidence with this case. I don't think that would have happened without a lot of the chatter going on around the country about how this investigation has transpired, and it shows there's some distrust between the family and law enforcement here. So there should be some forensic experts regarding data extraction present with the state, and also there will likely be an independent one that Mr. Crump's office has present with the DA at the same time. So that way, everybody can see it at the same time whether all data is being extracted, make sure nothing's being left behind, because the big issue here is that the early announcement of no foul play, the evidence of the cell phone that the family received, I believe a couple of days after Nolan went missing, or the night of, I can't recall the exact time, and then the missing of text messages and Snapchat data. And by allowing joint experts or joint data extraction at the same time, it's going to help the family feel comfortable knowing that all data is being looked at, is not being piecemeal. Because oftentimes I've seen cases where there's been a cell phone data that's been extracted and the state says, oh, well, that's other information deleted, we can't get it.
And then there's the question underneath all the others: the manner of death itself. As of this recording, the official autopsy results from the Mississippi State Medical Examiner have not been publicly released, and toxicology findings remain pending. A second independent autopsy was commissioned by the family. If those two findings diverge in any material way, this case moves from a private tragedy into something with far more serious implications. Because here is the distinction almost nobody says out loud. Drowning is a cause of death. It is not on its own a manner of death. A person can drown by accident. A person can drown by their own hand. A person can be drowned by someone else. The water doesn't testify. It just erases. The sheriff's office has publicly stated it does not currently suspect foul play, while also confirming that the FBI's Jackson Field office is reviewing threats connected to the case and assisting with digital evidence.
You know, there's not even an official conclusion or consensus on when or where Nolan died. Did he die on land? Did he die in the water? Did he die in a boat? His body was found on July 6th in the water by the island. And there are questions that remain about why he wasn't found earlier. Ben Crump said in an earlier press conference, quote, he went missing on July 4th, and they say his body should have been there on July 5th. Why would it not appear until July 6th? That's one of those things that's just not adding up. Now, I asked Brian Trasher from the United Cajun Navy about this. He was part of the search efforts for Nolan. He was there when Nolan's body was found. He was up in the air. Now, keep in mind, this was early on because Nolan's body wasn't even officially ID'd yet, but take a look at what he said in this earlier interview. Just to clarify something, why wasn't the body spotted earlier?
I think that I can tell you that I've started flying over the island, that part of the island where the body washed up, approximately 6:30 a.m. And I believe he was spotted by a park ranger at 8:45. My belief is that he just washed up within that time period because we were flying kind of a long grid north and south. And I think he just washed up and a park ranger just doing his normal runs in the morning. But also, too, given the situation, I'm sure they were a little more hyper aware and probably a little more head on a swivel on the island, knowing what happened and what was going on. But yeah, I was told that it was about 8:45 when a ranger spotted, called it in, because I did see a long line of emergency boats coming heading southwest.
Nolan's friend group, for their part, has publicly and forcefully denied any involvement, stating they have received death threats since the case gained national attention, and pushing back directly on any narrative involving race, given that Wells, who is black, was in a predominantly white friend group that day. The record doesn't add up. 3 times now, because 3 times is exactly how often this case has forced that phrase back into the open. Once on the island, once with the photograph, once with the data on a missing phone. Not because we're alleging a cover-up. Because the public statements, taken together, simply contradict each other, and nobody with authority has reconciled them yet. What happens next is procedural but consequential. Jackson County's district attorney has reportedly indicated that once the sheriff's investigation concludes, the case could be presented to a grand jury. Not necessarily for a homicide charge, but potentially for any offense the evidence supports, up to and including obstruction or tampering, if either is substantiated.
Anything, we would do it. Nolan brought us all together. And look, we now know one of the potential next steps, that this case could potentially be presented to a grand jury. Ben Crump announced that during a press conference, that the family had met with Jackson County District Attorney Angel Myers McIlrath. And the key takeaway from that meeting was that the DA said, according to him, that they would turn the case over to a grand jury for potential filing of charges or indictment once the sheriff's office finishes its investigation. To be clear, though, that's not a guarantee. It's not a guarantee that it'll be presented to a grand jury. It's not a guarantee that a grand jury would return an indictment. And by the way, we're not even saying that would be a homicide charge. Someone could potentially be charged with a crime that's unrelated specifically to Nolan's death. Tampering with evidence, lying to police. I'm not saying that happened, but I'm just giving you something to consider as we talk about the possibility of a grand jury. Going back to Sheriff John Ledbetter, he told ABC, I think it's important we don't put ourselves on a timetable, that we don't rush ourselves, but I do think it's important to be diligent in gathering all the facts. That's what the family deserves. He's right. That is what the family deserves. But look, we don't know what happened to Nolan. We don't know what he did after 3 p.m. We don't know if he died in the water, on land, or on a boat. We don't know if anybody had a role or there's criminal culpability here. We don't know if his phone was tampered with. We don't know who's telling the truth or not. But what I do know is we're going to stay on top of this and see how this progresses. That's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Everybody, thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you should get your podcasts. You can also check us out on NBC's Peacock as well. If you want to follow me, X, Instagram, my News Nation show, Jesse Weber Live, Monday through Friday, 11 p.m. Eastern. See you next time, everybody.
Until then, here is what remains a matter of public record and nothing more. A timeline with a several-hour gap nobody has fully closed. A photograph whose authenticity is disputed by the very friend it allegedly identifies. A voice on a video that multiple witnesses have identified in contradictory ways.
Anything.
There's been a lot of discrepancies and contradictions and different narratives about whether a fight or altercation took place too. So Ben Crump mentioned that there is a video circulating on social media on or near Horn Island in which he seemed to claim that Nolan might be heard. That he might be heard saying, quote, "Give me my freaking phone. What are you freaking doing?" During a press conference, when he was asked, look, how do you know that that's Nolan's voice? Crump reportedly said that multiple people identified it as Nolan's. But according to ABC News, Nolan's friend, Mr. Shepard, claims that there was no altercation, that Nolan wasn't involved. Shepard even says Nolan isn't in the video. He said, quote, "That's me yelling." There was no talk about a phone in that video. Nolan wasn't on the island. Shepard says that this was a fight with a stranger. Shepard told Rolling Stone, those were not Nolan's words, they were mine. I get that everybody wants justice for Nolan. Everybody wants to know exactly what happened. Now, Crump was asked about that this week at another presser, and he said, that's what a witness told us, and that's what we put out. And then another witness has come forward and said, no, that was his voice. We have other witnesses who said there were other altercations. We're trying to go through it all. We have audio people doing it, but we know certain people said it was him, and there are certain people who say it was not him. By the way,
And a family that has taken the unusual step of demanding joint access to forensic evidence most families never get to see. If you want to look at this yourself, start with the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources vessel tracking data obtained through public records request, and the Sheriff's Office's own public statements on the status of the investigation. Both exist independently of any family or media framing. Here's our question for you. Based only on the documented timeline, not the photo, not the video, just the confirmed movements of that boat, do you think there was enough time that afternoon for Nolan Wells to have made it back to the mainland at all? Tell us what you think in the comments. If this breakdown helped you understand what's actually been verified versus what's still just claim against claim, like this video, share it, subscribe to Evidence Nexus, and turn on notifications, because we'll be back the moment the autopsy results become public record.